Our next speaker hails, I'm told, from Glenageary, but she's now based in the UK. She's heads up an organisation called DB Recovery Resources. It supplies a daily news service to the international alcohol and drug treatment field on addiction recovery. Previously, she was CEO of the Addiction Recovery Foundation, and she was editor of Addiction Today. She's also written a publication called Addiction and Recovery Self-Help for Friends, Families and Addicts, and that's been translated into 7 different languages, I understand. I'm sure you didn't do the translation yourself, Deirdre, but it suggests it's certainly something of a seminal work on the subject. She has also received a number of awards for her work and has appeared as an expert on a number of media stations and continues to do that in a number of media outlets. So I ask you to welcome, please, Deirdre Boyd.
Thank you. Good morning or good afternoon. Can you hear me? Can you hear me at the back? Great. I come here with not one word written, and I have no PowerPoint or anything, because I am now in the same position, I'm assuming, as you might be when you want to look up some research. And you may be anti-legalization, you may be pro, you may not know the situation, but you might just want to see the research. You might want to give a response to somebody who's saying something that you know in your gut is wrong, but you don't know where to get the information. So I set up 2 years ago, September 2 years ago, I set up DB Recovery Resources after having worked in the charity field for over 2 decades. And I set it up basically because I hate lies. And I hate lies when they're harmful to other people and could kill them. And I hate lies when they're being peddled and paid for with my taxes. And what was happening was that there was another daily news service in the UK, and all it did was pro-legalisation stuff, and it was pro-prescribing and really very rarely covered recovery. And you would think that the whole world wanted legalisation and that everything was good. So I started the news service. It's not in any way totally about cannabis or legalisation, but that was kind of the passion that prompted me to start it. I am passionate about getting the truth out there. I cannot control people's reactions to it, but what I do like to do is just get the truth out there, and people will do with it as they will. And so DB Recovery Resources, it now goes out every weekday, except it didn't go out this morning because I'm here. And I'm delighted to say that Catherine has just told me that she gets it every morning, so I'm very honoured. And it goes to about 9,400 people every day. Sometimes I'll reduce the numbers because to keep people loyal for a long time every day, sometimes if I think there aren't news items that concern a certain group, I leave them out. But basically, you know, it's 9,400 multiplied by 5 days a week, multiplied by 50 weeks a year, so that's something like 2 million views. And before I start on why this might be useful to you, I'm just going to pick up about 3 points from Kevin's speech earlier, and he has a wonderful website, learnaboutsam.org. Kevin mentioned 3 small things. When Kevin mentioned the harms from cannabis, there's one item that was missing, and that's when people have a dual diagnosis. Now, I'm not talking about whether cannabis does or does not cause psychosis, although there's quite a bit of research on it. What I am saying is that when people take cannabis, they tend not to take their meds. And there are a number of high school massacres in the States where the shooters have been on cannabis and or have started on cannabis. And this is something that's not discussed, that when you're on cannabis, you don't take your meds. It discourages you because people just can't do the compliance. Their brain is fuddled. The second point is, again, about Portugal. In 2001, Kevin mentioned the treatment and everything. And the proponents of legalization, when they say the death rates have gone down, they never mention the drug use going up. But what I've never seen them mention is the fact that Portugal instituted its very first ever harm reduction program that year. Now, the point of the harm reduction is to reduce deaths. So, which do we think reduce the deaths? The very first ever harm reduction program or decriminalisation? Well, to me, the answer seems obvious. And it's one of those things, you need to get all the facts on certain nuances. And the final point, Kevin mentioned Richard Branson, who, of course, is very well known as a proponent of legalisation of drugs. But what's not well known is that in an interview last year in a magazine, he was actually quoted as saying he operates a zero-tolerance drugs policy in his own companies. So his own staff have a zero-tolerance drug policy. Now, I'm on television, so I cannot talk about hypocrisy, but here we are. Anyway, so how might DB Recovery Resources help you? I hope you're writing down the web thing there. And what I'd like you to do is, you can go on the other tabs as well, but if we just click on News. Now, I've put this in, this top item, I put this in deliberately for today, and it hasn't gone out. You can see, 15th October, yesterday was the last one that went out. Today's hasn't gone out. There's a lot of items on this. Next week, I will have hit 10,000 news items. Now, that's 10,000 news items that have come out over the last 2 years. It's a lot. So if you're looking for something, you can see the search box here, you cannot just put in cannabis or something like that. It's got to be more specific. And I've got 3 words, Lambeth, Hayes, and Hask, which could be very, very useful for looking up any information you want before you even go on to anything else. The reclassification, this was just in 2008. I think this might have been the very last radio interview in the UK before cannabis had been downgraded to class C and then went back up to class B. And basically, this talked about, you can see the harms of legal versus illegal drugs, the fact that there are 10 times more deaths roughly from alcohol than from illegal drugs, and there are 100 times more deaths from tobacco than there are from illegal drugs. And, oh yes, they're regulated. So, of course, everybody in the cannabis industry says, oh, it'll all work when it's regulated. Well, no. It is a basic business law that when a product is made available, more people will use it. That is basic business and market knowledge. So why would anybody think it differs for this particular commodity? It doesn't. And Kevin has gone on, about big pot, and been like big tobacco. Well, I don't think it's just like big tobacco. I think it's like big tobacco and big pharma rolled into one. Because we hear now more and more in the pharmaceutical industry about the damage from people using prescribed medications and how many are using it. Well, I don't think it's a coincidence that this is getting attention at a time when people want to replace those drugs with cannabis-based drugs. I don't think that's a coincidence. I think big pot is big tobacco and big pharmaceuticals rolled into one. And I think that when big tobacco was starting up, it would have loved the strategies that the cannabis people are using. I think they would have loved it. I remember one of my grandmothers, she's got all these knitting magazines, or my granny, as Kevin would have me say. She had all these knitting magazines, but they were, with Roger Moore when he was young, and Aran sweaters. But there was a whole page ads, I remember them. A cigarette a day keeps the doctor away. I've seen it, I've kept them. A cigarette a day keeps the doctor away. And I was talking to the taxi driver on the way here, and he said, we were considered not cool if we didn't smoke, if we didn't have a cigarette in our hands. I thought, my God, that's so reminiscent of the youth today, except just substitute the leaf, substitute the cannabis leaf for the tobacco leaf, just like the tobacco manufacturers are, with their plantations, their factories, their distribution networks, their retail networks. All they need to do is substitute a leaf. And I was told this 20 years ago, so this isn't new. This has been coming on. It's about seeing the death of the tobacco industry and what replaces it. So we have these harms. There's a whole list here. I'm not going to call them all out. Medical marijuana sends the wrong message to kids. That's one of them. And Kevin has talked about the difference between medicinal marijuana, or rather, items that are based on certain components found in the marijuana plant versus the marijuana plant itself. And a school teacher said to me, Deirdre, you may as well say, get your penicillin from chewing the tree bark, or get your penicillin from chewing mouldy bread. And that's the same thing, except to me that encapsulates it very, very neatly. That's not research-based, but we all know, penicillin comes from that, but it's not the same thing. Fact one, and look, this is 2008 and the facts haven't changed. Marijuana is the #1 drug children are in treatment for. Hospital emergency rooms, other damages to children, short and long-term effects. Cannabis is linked to violence. So many people who want to legalise cannabis say it's not linked to violence. And Kevin explained some of the point about cannabis doesn't kill. Well, there are people who've had heart attacks and things brought on by cannabis, but I'm not talking about that. I am again talking about people who go off their meds because of cannabis and kill other people. That's been going on for decades. Damage to physical health, birth defects, horrendous effect on children of people who've been using cannabis. And yet, it's not regulated in the way, as alcohol is with fetal alcohol syndrome. Horrendous defects. And children born with withdrawal symptoms. Children stunted for life, and you can predict in advance what the rest of their life is going to be. Respiratory system damage, etc. So there's a whole load of stuff here. And of course, the link to cancer. Just like tobacco, there's a link to cancers. And transitional cell carcinoma, etc. I'm not going to, and strokes, heart attacks, immune system damage, that's true, infertility, that's very true, brain damage. We've heard about the links to schizophrenia and depression, and the gateway effect, which people debate, but, frankly, I don't know anybody in recovery from drugs who hasn't started on marijuana. Be it gateway, be it not gateway, certainly maybe, if they had stopped at that stage, and tomorrow is about prevention, would they have gone on to do all the harms to themselves and others that did happen? Learning and social behaviour, employability, because there's lack of motivation, as Kevin said. So I'm just going to go back to the website, and you can see it's there. There's a search box here. Now, if you either want to put in Lambeth or reclassification, because that won't stay at the top as new news comes in, if you want to put Lambeth or reclassification, just reclassification for that one, you'll get it up again. What I want to do is put in Lambeth, just to show that it's going to be this easy for you. So she, hoping that the technology will work. So here we are, Lambeth. And you could put depenalisation in, but I want to show you could have a few things here. And then at the bottom, you'll see older posts, which is why I put in Lambeth, just so you could see you can do that.
Deirdre, just explain that Lambeth is an area.
Oh, sorry. Lambeth is an area in South London. And in 2001, they decided they were going to have the Lambeth experiment, which was depenalisation. And people were just going to be allowed to have cannabis, etc., and they'd have no consequences. And it was going to free up the police. And everything was going to be basically the same promises that Colorado has, if I can put it that way. There's something wrong with this page. I need to renew it. Oh, no, it's not. I see why. So you need to click on the headline again, because that's literally only a list. Now, I've got two papers here. One is about policing, and one is about hospital admissions. This is a 10-year follow-up study by accredited researchers. So this is 10 years after the depenalisation. And it's a 64-page document, which also explains the methodology and everything if you want it. So I'm briefly going to go through this, so just so you know. So it's March 2014, because they waited 10 years, and then it takes a while to analyse and interpret the data. So what I really want to see is, I have to really look forward, my eyesight's getting worse. We evaluate the impact on crime of a localised policing experiment that depenalised possession of small quantities of cannabis in the London borough of Lambeth. We find that depenalisation in Lambeth led to significant increases in cannabis possession offences that persisted well after the policy experiment ended. We find evidence that the policy caused the police to reallocate efforts towards crimes related to the supply of Class A drugs, as well as reallocating efforts towards non-drug crime. And in fact, there were significant reductions in non-drug crime, but there was also an increased police anti-crime effort going on. Despite the overall fall in crime, we find the total welfare, in fact, there's somewhere else it says that non-drug crime fell, but drug crime rose, which isn't surprising if you use your common sense. But drug crime rose. Despite the overall fall in crime, we find the total welfare of local residents likely fell as measured by house prices. These welfare losses are concentrated in Lambeth zip codes where the illicit drug market was most active. So this does go on, and it's extremely thorough. It's very rigorous. But what it does say, more drug use, more drug crime, and house prices went down because of what was going on in the area. So let me go back to the second one. I just wanted to do this in front of you, because this, if you were sitting in front of your desk with no piece of paper, no nothing, this is how you can just look up the information. And I just want you to see how easy it can be. And I'm only going to bring up about 4 items today, but there are 10,000 in that. As I say, so you need to be careful. This was hospital admissions from the same thing. Again, January 2014. We evaluate the impact of a policing experiment that depenalised the possession of small quantities of cannabis in the London borough of Lambeth on hospital admissions related to illicit drug use. And if we look at that, we show, we find the depenalisation of cannabis has significant longer-term impacts on hospital admissions related to the use of hard drugs, raising hospital admission rates for men by between 40 and 100% of their pre-policy baseline levels. And the impacts are concentrated among men in younger age cohorts. And this again, I think this is 57 pages long, so you could read the whole thing, you can read the background, you can read the methodology. It is a very serious and rigorous piece of research. So that was Lambeth. I'm going to do an American one now, which is called Hayes. So if you want to remember the word Hayes, oops, my typing has gone wonky. The buttons are in a different place to mine. We'll go back quickly. And here we have Clearing the Haze. This is actually written by a paper called The Gazette, which is a Pulitzer Prize winning paper. So we're not talking about something small and inconsequential. It's also local to the Colorado area. And if we just click on that thing there, we will get the website. It's got a load of information. And again, I'm going to lead you to read it yourself, but look at this quote. "The ugly truth is that Colorado was suckered. It was promised regulation and has been met by an industry that fights tooth and nail any restrictions that limit its profitability." This is by a Pulitzer Prize-winning journal. You can go through it, but there are a lot of items, and I just think we go back to this one, analysing Colorado's grand experiment. And if this is the right link, it just has, no, this is not the one I want. Sorry about this. It has a wonderful link here. Maybe it's about trends. This is the latest one. Here we are. And before you even look at the statistics or the figures, just look at where the graphs go. Up, up, up. More people hospitalized. It's a federal crime. Look at that. More people hospitalized. Look at those. Look at that. Without even knowing the figures, just see where it's going. And this is what common sense tells you it would go anyway. More kids using. Look at this. What grows here doesn't stay here. I don't know if people are aware that it's seeping out into neighbouring states as well. It's just been exported, so it's just, it does pop pay. See that little red line? See that little red thing? That is the percentage of taxes that it brings in. And according to reports, just about all of that is needed to pay for regulation. And of course, it doesn't cover the health and social consequences that have been brought on by legalization. More people dying, look. I mean, without even knowing the figures, all of these graphs are going in one direction. Everything's getting worse. As I say, you can read all of this yourself and go into the details. I just wanted to give you an overview of where you can go to get the information. And now if we go down, just one more thing on this one, if I can find it down here. Legalization didn't unclog prisons. And there's a lovely little piece here. But they do say it's a myth again, you know, I leave it to you to read. But, oh look, Kevin, you're quoted in this one. Here we are. Only 1.4% of inmates in the state correction system were imprisoned for offences involving only marijuana-related crimes. And that's something like, I think, 48 people a year in the previous year were jailed for cannabis possession. And the accumulation of prisoners for the same, of offenders for the same thing, the accumulation was only about 58, 56, 58. If I'm out by one or two people. That's it. So we're talking about 99% of the population having to change their values and their systems and being put at risk for 1%. And we're also talking about, as Kevin mentioned, a lot of people in there for possession alone have traded down. You know, they've done deals. They've done worse than that. So if this is the few number that are actually in there for cannabis possession alone, who are the people who are the 6,000 offenders that Obama released onto the streets? Well, they're hard drug dealers, and they've been there for gun crimes and other things. And I read recently he released 5,000. Now, I don't know whether that's the same 5,000 as part of the 6 or a new 5,000. But these aren't people. He's not releasing people who are in there just for marijuana. He's trying to unclog the prisons by something he thinks will perhaps win votes, although it's highly unlikely he's going to get in again. Well, I don't think he can, actually, for another term. But this is, you know, he has also been photographed in many instances with George Soros, of course, a billionaire who, just about everybody knows, is behind the financing of most of the anti-legalization campaigns. And if you look at some of the reports, any report you see or any person or something that figures depend on, just Google the name of it and George Soros, or the Open Foundation, which belongs to him, and see if you can find the financial links. Follow the money. Follow the money, because a lot of this is biased, a lot of it. And then just to give you an idea, again, of bias, do I need to get out of this? I think I do. I'm going to put in HASC. Now, this is the Home Affairs Select Committee. And this is a blog I did for Conservative Woman. I'm not very popular. Why did I refuse next week's Commons Drugs Conference speaking invitation? I didn't get another one. Because I thought I would have far more influence by blogging and being public than speaking, and that turned out to be the truth. It turned out that it was going to parade as a government committee reporting to the United Nations Special Assembly on Drugs next year. But, you know, it had Nick Clegg, you know, the failed politician, chairing it. In fact, after I published this, he pulled out. I'm not saying the two are connected, but... And it was peopled with, it had only one speaker who did not support legalization. That was it. And they were going to offer this to the United Nations as an official report. And in fact, I spoke to the person afterwards, and she was only given 5 minutes. She's only given 5 minutes. And after I publicised this, as I say, I just put the truth out there, but sometimes it lands in very unexpected places. So they invited me, and they invited one other person. But, you know, between us, we would have added up to 15 minutes. And would that have affected how the report was written? Because I've been in government meetings where the report was written before people even spoke. And their opinions were given in that report, whether they were absent or not. So I didn't trust this one. So we need to always look at the money. You know, if you read of something, follow the money. That's all I'm going to say. There are some other things. I mean, there was a headline, I can't remember if it was earlier this week or last week, and it said, government report, this is in the UK, government report says hundreds of millions of taxes can be raised via legalisation. And of course, you look at it further, and no, it's not. It was a committee that was again headed by Nick Clegg, and it relied heavily on a report that was, guess what, funded by George Soros. So, you know, you look behind the headline and the page, you look at the money, and basically all the billionaires, he's not the only billionaire funding this, the billionaires funding legalisation like to make it look as though there's a lot of grassroots movement. Bernie, are you telling me to stop? Have I come to the end of my time?
You've done really well.
I was afraid I'd dry up, and I'd ask Bernie to save me, but I've done well. So basically, at the end of all of this, I think I'm just going to do two very quick things in that case. Fungus. Look up fungus on this website as well, because what's not mentioned in the cannabis thing is it's uncontrolled, and there are all sorts of funguses and things. And one of the things that some people in Colorado and things are doing in the local areas is they're actually suing because the cannabis goods were not safe. They're not hygienic. And there's some class action suits, I think, going on around that. Kevin might correct me once he stops playing with his phone. There were. Huge class action, right? Yeah, huge class action. And this might be one of the ways to go back. But I think people went into this, you know, when I say that very final point that, you know, George Soros, at one stage Ralph Nadelman had $40 million in his pro-legalization pot. It's reckoned he's had over $100 million over the years. George Soros has spent over $70 million in the media. He funds research posts in universities, and he does journalism scholarships. Very, very widespread targeted campaign, very widespread. And you don't do that for no reason. And so who are we little people to fight against that kind of money? And for me and a lot of the other little people in the UK, we have some kind of influence and power only because of the internet, because we can talk to each other. And it's very hard to realise. I talk to some, I'm in close touch with some of the benzo campaigners, and they've been at this for over 30 years, but they've worked in isolation, only been able to talk to each other and with us since about 2006. That was the year, really. I mean, I've had websites since 1997, but 2006, I remember clearly, was the very first time I was able to market anything to therapists, because enough of them were on the web. Therapists are, sorry for insulting anyone, therapists aren't the best administrators. Lots of compassion and everything. They're not the best at administration, and they were slow to come to the internet. I think iPhones, iPads, intuitive stuff has made it easier. But 2006 was the very first time that we were able to market via the internet, and that's only 9 years ago. It's not that long. It feels like we've had the internet forever. But that's how us little people become big people. So, and I just want to end with, and I discussed it, my name is Deirdre, I'm a recovering alcoholic, and I'm over 24 years in recovery. Thank you.